Yes, we're talking about Star Wars games. Yeah, originally the plan was to just put this on the table, but I think you could see the problem there. Star Wars, a franchise famous for creating 3 of the greatest movies of all time, and then 3 of the most divisive films of all time, and then 2 of the worst films of all time, and like 20 series, although I've kind of stopped counting at this point. Star Wars is my personal favourite franchise of all time. Can you tell? Yeah, see, with the popularity of virtually anything, games companies are always going to drop in their input in the form of tie-in games. Now, Star Wars games have been rolling off the digital development line since the early 1980s, with titles like Empire Strikes Back in 1982, plus about 4 dozen more games with the same names as the movies. The problem with these games released in the early 1980s is they were released on the Genesis, NES, and Atari 2600, all of which are systems I don't own. So today, we'll primarily be focused on the games that released past the mid-1990s. Yeah, that still doesn't mean every game, by the way. There are quite literally hundreds of these things after all, so there are going to be some on this list that I'm just going to be glancing over or briefly cover, as well as grouping them together by series. A lot of Star Wars games released in the 90s were simply named after what you do in the game. Episode 1 Racer, X-Wing, pretty self-explanatory stuff. However, one of the first truly great Star Wars games was Dark Forces, released on Microsoft Windows and Mac in 1995, and a year later on PlayStation. I played the Windows version personally, and let me tell you, it was quite difficult to play due to the fact that it would only let me record in a tiny window. It is a very good game, however, pretty much a clone of other popular shooters at the time like Doom or Wolfenstein. A pretty simple FPS where you shoot stormtroopers and get lost because all the rooms look the same. This game unusually, however, is part of the Jedi Knight series, which were also first-person shooters. However, this time, like the name suggests, you're a Jedi. Yeah, I only own Jedi Academy out of these, the last game in the series. It's a pretty simple third-person Jedi game, set 10 years after the fall of the Empire, where you take control of Jaden Core, a young Jedi Padawan in training, and engage in missions across the galaxy, learning new skills and abilities as you go along. It's a pretty solid game, although it does have that late 90s, early 2000s clunk that a lot of games have on this list, like Knights of the Old Republic. I wasn't a huge fan of this one. I had to barricade my door after saying that. Yeah, a lot of people will swear by this game being one of the best RPGs of all time, but I'm personally just not a huge fan of the controls, at least on Xbox, which is a pity because this game explores an era in the Star Wars universe that is rarely discussed and makes for a great story. This game later got a sequel, and in 2011 an MMORPG called The Old Republic. Yeah, personally I don't really see a reason to play this one. They did make pretty cool LEGO sets out of it though. Speaking of LEGO, there's certainly no shortage of LEGO Star Wars games, the first of which released in 2005, simply called LEGO Star Wars the video game, focusing on the first 3 movies, while LEGO Star Wars 2, the original trilogy, focused on the original trilogy. But let's be honest, nobody cares about these 2 because LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga exists. A compilation of the first 2 games, plus a lot of extras. It is easily one of the best LEGO games ever made, even if it's not as expansive as some later ones, like LEGO Star Wars 3 The Clone Wars, my personal favourite. This game, as the name suggests, focuses on the Clone Wars TV show. However, only the first 3 seasons, because apparently they didn't want to wait for it to end. It adds a more expansive hub alongside ground battles, and just simply more to do, although many will still favour the complete saga. There was also a LEGO Force Awakens game, which made no sense to me at all. And finally, LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. Well, what about my favourite genre? Shooters. Yeah, that's a lot of games. Alongside the aforementioned Dark Forces, we have Republic Commando, possibly one of the greatest single-player shooters of the early 2000s, focusing around the Clone Commando Team Delta as they fight across battlefields of the Clone Wars. As stated before, it does have that early 2000s clunk when it comes to controls, but that's not to say it's not a hell of a lot of fun. However, I think it's safe to say the 2 games everyone thinks of when they hear the word Star Wars shooter are Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, made by the now shut down Pandemic Studios. These games focused on large-scale battles involving all factions, vehicles, and heroes in the Star Wars universe, kinda similar to the Battlefield series. These 2 are often seen as 2 of the best multiplayer games of all time, a point I can't prove or disprove since Xbox Live was shut down, although there probably is servers still running on PC. The second one is definitely the better of the 2, however, with a much more interesting and fleshed out campaign, focusing on clone troopers and later stormtroopers involved in the 501st Legion. And do you want to know what isn't fleshed out and fun? These 2 games. Yeah, around the early 2010s, EA was handed a near exclusive license to Star Wars games, and I think you all know what that means. It was time for a reboot, which was soon followed by an oh fuck moment with the release of Star Wars Battlefront in 2015. No cool subtitle or anything, just that. See, there were 2 games released on DS and PSP called Star Wars Renegade Squadron and Star Wars Elite Squadron, and clearly EA weren't capable of coming up with names better than that. Battlefront 2015, or Battlefront EA as it's commonly called, is one of the laziest, most content-sapped games ever released, and yet it's still one of my favourite games of all time. Yeah, I hate myself too. Yeah, it's basically Call of Duty Star Wars Edition, and although it had a lot of flaws, one of which being a lack of a campaign, it was still a lot of fun back in the day. So what about its sequel, Battlefront 2? Oh shit. Yeah, Battlefront 2 released in 2017, and indeed, it was a better game, except it had a pretty big problem, which was it encouraged people to gamble. This game was released at the height of the whole loot box fiasco, and the fact that you could quite literally pay to win made a lot of people pretty angry. However, beside its legal troubles, it's actually a decent game. It has a lot more content than its 2015 counterpart, including a campaign. Not a very good one, but still. Yeah, this game just kind of felt pretty soulless in my opinion. It's definitely a fun game, but I just didn't find myself playing it nearly as much as the first one, even though I pre-ordered the deluxe edition. But what if you're more a fan of removing limbs instead of frying people with glorified laser pointers? Well, for that, you're gonna need a lightsaber. Again, we've already mentioned the Jedi Knight games, but what about The Force Unleashed? This is one of the best Star Wars games ever made. Dare I say, one of the best games of all time. The sheer amount of power your character, Galen Marek, also known as Vader's apprentice, has is incredible. And it's very fun to fight Jedi, throw stormtroopers, and pull Star Destroyers out of the sky. Now, this game did have a sequel, and that's about all I'm willing to say about that. Another game in this vein was Jedi Fallen Order, another contender for greatest Star Wars game of all time. The combat is fun, the worlds are interesting to explore, and the story is incredibly enthralling. A lot of people liken this game to a combination between Uncharted and Dark Souls. Yeah, I haven't exactly played either of them besides Uncharted on the PS Vita, so I'm not exactly sure why I brought that up. It's definitely a bit more down to earth than The Force Unleashed. The only problem is that in both games, once you've completed the story, there's basically nothing to do. But besides that, these 2 are definitely 2 I'd highly recommend. Finally, we have Star Wars flight sims, or more accurately, space simulators. Of course, we have the aforementioned X-Wing, alongside Rogue Leader, Jedi Starfighter, and the much more recent Squadrons. Yeah, there's not exactly a lot to say on these, to be honest. They're pretty much just flight sims that involve the extinction of thousands of lives when you blow up a Star Destroyer. These games pretty much always work better on PC, and as someone who instead invests in shitty Kinect games, well, one in particular, Kinect Star Wars. Yeah, it's not exactly great. Look, the game itself, it's okay. A collection of a few mini-games like Jedi Training, Rancor Rampage, and this. Yeah, something tells me it wouldn't run much better anyways. So that's most, if not all, of the big Star Wars games. But that's not to say there's not plenty of others that I've sidelined. Pinball, arcade games, racing games, there are truly no shortage of these things, but none compare to the greatest Star Wars game of all time, Angry Birds Star Wars. Yeah, I never realised how much Star Wars stuff I actually have here. But yeah, that was Star Wars games. Or at least all the ones that I need to fix this. Or at least all the ones that I was willing to cover. Yeah, funnily enough, that's not a full list of every Star Wars game. Yeah, again, I kind of blew most of the budget on this thing. Thank you for watching. If you did get to this point in the video, of course, feel free to leave a comment below on Star Wars games, I guess. Can you tell I don't script these things very well? And of course, as always, subscribe for more.